Okay. Today is February 18th, 2021. I am Daniel Erickson, and today I'm interviewing Dr. Scott LaMascus over Zoom about Oklahoma Humanities and his interactions with the organization. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Yeah. And let's see, to get us started, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure, I'm happy to do that, Daniel. Thank you. Well, I'm a faculty member. I've taught English, American literature, and composition in universities like the University of Oklahoma as a graduate student, a graduate teacher, as well as at Georgia Southwestern State out in south of Atlanta. And then for the last 25 years here at Oklahoma Christian University in North Oklahoma City. And that's where I've had the opportunity to not only see lots of public humanities things going on, for example, at the University of Oklahoma, where one of my mentors was R.C. Davis, who for many years ran and still does run a significant number of public humanities type programs, as well as in Georgia, where I got to see some public humanities programming going on our campus, as well as at the other university system campuses in Atlanta and across the state. And so when I came to Oklahoma Christian and returned back to my home state, I'm an Okie. And when I got back here, it was just a natural thing that got started and sort of has grown into a long and deep affection for Oklahoma Humanities, as well as for the types of programs that the NEH, the National Endowment for Humanities, and Oklahoma Humanities operate really across the nation. So it's been a lot of fun. It still is a lot of fun. So.
All right, great. And yeah, so going back to your like early education going up and through high
Oh,
school.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you could just tell me a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'm old, so I never know how far back to go. Well, I grew up, I was born at St. Anthony's Hospital here in Oklahoma City, and I'll skip over just a few highlights. I grew up in Hennessy, Oklahoma, which is just south of Enid in Kingfisher County, between Kingfisher and Enid, and grew up in the oil field. My father was employed for many years by Kirkpatrick Oil Company, which today you probably know, Daniel, as Kirkpatrick Bank is one of the family enterprises that you probably are more aware of. So I was kind of a Kirkpatrick kid. I grew up on company grounds in a little trailer house that they put on the side of the location where my dad worked in Hennessy. And it was great fun. I mean, at age 10, I knew every part of a drilling rig and a pumping unit. And if my dad said, grab me a number 10 Continental IMSCO flange and a, whatever, I would run. I've forgotten it all now. But at the time, I'd run out to the shop and grab the number 10 Continental IMSCO flange and run back. And it was fun. And then I was always a reader. I grew up reading. My family, in fact, where you and I are doing this interview right at the end of kind of an Oklahoma blizzard, some historic cold and snow. One of my earliest memories in that trailer house, when I was maybe 6 or 7 years old, came a big blizzard like this. Wind was blowing the drifts up into 10 and 12-foot drifts, and my dad got a rare occasion to not be at work because, of course, they couldn't get out to the rigs or the pumping units if they had wanted to. And so he read aloud to us Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe, read it aloud every night for a couple of hours probably to get through it. And it's one of those great memories. And, I have a little library card and went to the library all the time. I was a bookish kid. Enjoyed a lot of outdoor things. But anyway, all that to say that I had just really kind of a, not quite Mayberry RFD type growing up, if you know that, Daniel, but it was a lot of fun. And I had just really great growing up years in a small town, great schools. We did Spanish, every student, every day. from K to 12 in that school system. We had a very progressive school superintendent who grew up in our community and then went out to California and was an educator and came back with this idea of bilingual education and said bilingual education is the future of education. And so, you know, I grew up in a real humanities-based kind of environment in that school, and it was a very education-oriented community. My classmates, 63 of us, and we are, I think, probably overrepresented in things like we have a Fortune 500 CEO in our group, a woman no less, who's been very powerful and influential in her area, but doctors and a faculty member at Air Force Academy. And you know, I'm kind of an underachiever when it compared with my high school graduating class. And so then I came to Oklahoma Christian as an undergraduate, OU for graduate school, and then that's really the rest. And I have a wonderful spouse who's a medical doctor, is a chair of primary care for Mercy Healthcare in Oklahoma. And we have two sons who are adults. One is a graduate student in tribology or mechanical engineering at University of Pennsylvania. I don't understand anything he does, except I know that it's with little tiny things that he can see on an atomic microscope. And my other son is entering medical school this fall. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
So when you went to like undergrad college, yeah, because you like what'd you major in and sort of what's your experience
Oh,
going through
sure.
that?
Well, yeah, I had no idea in the world, Daniel, what I might do after I graduated. In fact, confession here, I'm really technically a college dropout. My first semester I arrived on campus, I was probably the greenest, you know, I was a kind of from the sticks and had no idea how to manage myself on campus. By my second semester, I got my grades from the first semester. They wisely sent them to us right after we got back from Christmas break. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm done here. And but I went to the bursar's office and found out it was too late to get a refund on the room and board that I'd paid and the tuition I'd paid for second semester. So I decided, well, okay, if I paid for it, I'm going to eat it. You know, if I paid to live here, I'm going to live here, and until the end of the semester. And so mentally, I had checked out. I didn't have a fall schedule, didn't have any of that, and was just really lost. And a really great faculty member came alongside me, knew my parents. He had taught my parents when they were in undergraduate. And so one day, and I'm sure my name was on some list out there of the knuckleheads who haven't gotten it together on campus. And so even though it seemed like he just happened to see me one day, I'm sure he had been looking for me and went, oh, hey, there's one of the people on my list, and buttonholed me and said, hey, let's have a cup of coffee, you know, feigned interest in me. I mean, hey, I'm 18, I know nothing, I do nothing, you know. And so I went to his office and we sat down and had a cup of coffee, and he said, well, what did you do in high school? And I said, well, and I started talking about some of the things I'd done in high school, one of which was newspaper. And so he said, well, why don't you build on that? And he asked me what I wanted to major in, and I was lost in terms of even defining a major for myself. And so it's kind of one of those classic cases of interventional mentoring. That's what we call it today. It's where you don't wait for the mentee to come to you and ask, hey, you know, Daniel, what do you think about this? It's where you go find them and you say, hey, Scott, we need to talk because you don't have a major and you don't have a class schedule. And so he intervened like that. And really, that's the only thing that made the difference. So I was very involved in undergraduate as a newspaper editor. That was one of the scholarships that I could get then, and I needed money help to get through undergraduate because I really honestly couldn't afford it, and my parents couldn't afford it by that time. This was 1981, 2, 3, 4, and my dad was in a business venture, the mortgages of which were held, the debt of which was held by a bank called Penn Square Bank, which if you ever read about the 1980s and the bank collapse nationally, it started with the Penn Square Bank and First Chicago. And guess who owned all my dad's debt? Penn Square Bank and First Chicago. And so my parents were dead dog broke. And so anyway, this guy kind of intervened and helped me find my way. His name is Bailey McBride, and you're going to hear his name come up later in the narrative when we're talking about Oklahoma Humanities, because he really has been my lifelong mentor. And, you know, he's, as I said, family friend. As it turned out, he was a classmate of a man who turned out to be my father-in-law. All of this, just a lot of serendipity like that piled on top of serendipity. And so, but that's what I did during undergrad. I was a newspaper editor and loved writing, and ended up being an English professional writing major. And so after undergraduate, my first jobs were in journalism, and I got to work for the university in its PR office with a couple of the publications that it had, and then later went to graduate school. And I tried journalism at OU, and honestly, I'm a dropout from a master's program. I enrolled in a master's program. There's a theme here, Daniel. Dropout makes good, I guess. But anyway, I was accepted and did a couple semesters in the master's program. In fact, they gave me a great fellowship at OU. There were really great faculty in that program. And so it was all me. It wasn't anything about them. But I just realized it probably wasn't the right thing for me. And when I got over to the master's program in English, American Literature and Composition, it was just like home. It was like, oh, this is what I've been looking for. And, you know, by this time, Daniel, I'm 26 or 7 years old, and married, and we didn't have children yet. But anyway, it was a fun ride. I learned a lot, and honestly, I do still often draw upon the skills of journalism, interviewing, you know, being able to write something quickly and accurately and get it ready quickly. And so even as an academic leader later, after years as a faculty member, when I joined the academic leadership and then eventually served as chief academic officer for my university, you know, writing and being able to communicate clearly and quickly was always a great skill, a strength for me. So I hope that answered some of the questions you were asking.
Yeah. What was it about the American literature that really like drew you to it?
Oh, well, you know, going back to Robinson Crusoe, right? I mean, just I always loved stories, and I took some undergraduate courses in William Faulkner, and you know, when I got to OU, I loved the medieval studies stuff that the English department at OU was doing at that time. The graduate director was a really great, truly great scholar and educator named Nicholas Howe. And Dr. Howe, the late Nick Howe, had been at Ohio State, University of Oklahoma, and then University of California, Berkeley. He was a fantastic man and teacher and role model. And so honestly, I actually wanted my doctoral program to focus on Renaissance literature. And all my mentors at OU kind of were giving that green lights. And I started looking at some of the things I was going to have to do, and I really need to work on my languages. I didn't have enough languages, even though Portuguese, Spanish, and French were already languages for me. I really was going to have to do some linguistics background that I didn't have. And, you know, they don't teach Middle English in Hennessy, Oklahoma. And so anyway, I I honestly chose sort of something I loved, but which could be done without having to have, another decade of my life invested in linguistic study that I really needed. And I was always really glad about that. I love um, the period that I have specialized in was post-Civil War, so 1870 to 1920 through the Progressive era, and a lot of important work going on at that time, and I loved it. So anyway.
Yeah. Where did you pick up all those other languages you mentioned?
Oh, well, along the way. The thing about language learnings, in my view, is, well, two things I would say, Daniel. One, learning any language well, other than your first language, is really the building of a scaffold or a structure on which you're going to be placing lots of kinds of learning, but also where you can, using that same scaffold that you built with Spanish, in my case, during grade school and high school. And I also did a minor in Spanish in undergraduate. Once you build that scaffold, you really can just take other languages and kind of hang them on that same scaffold. Maybe that's a good metaphor for this. And so along the way, my family hosted an exchange student from Brazil. And so I added Portuguese to my scaffold of languages. And then in graduate school, I added French. I had added French early because you have to have two for a PhD in the humanities at OU. And so Portuguese and Spanish and French were my two languages that I certified at OU for my doctoral studies, mostly because they didn't have a Portuguese test. My Portuguese was actually stronger at that point in time. And so anyway, I just picked them up, and I did get a chance to travel in Brazil. Some significantly got to go visit this exchange student that we had hosted here. And so I got to go there, and it was a lot of fun. So,
Yeah, that's really interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, after you finished up your, studies and everything in college, should sort of give me like, sort of a roadmap of your post-graduation career path.
Sure, sure. So when I was finishing up my doctoral degree at OU, I went to the Modern Language Association annual convention, and I believe it was in Washington, D.C. that year. And I got several nice interviews. At that time, academic jobs were already beginning to really be pretty rare in terms of a tenure track position. And I felt so fortunate that I had several interviews at universities across the nation. My wife and I, frankly, Daniel, we were just, we were kind of desperate, we were at a place where we would have taken any job that we were given. And I got a chance to interview at a nice university in California and a nice university in Tennessee, and then the University System of Georgia had a unit called Georgia Southwestern. It's the alma mater of Jimmy and Rosalind Carter, for example. It's down in Southwest Georgia. And it was just a really great fit, and they really wanted me, and I really liked what I saw. And at that time, my wife's family lived in Atlanta. Those family members have almost all passed away now, but at that time, 30 years ago, I guess, or almost 30 years ago, we thought, okay, well, we're going to be an East Coast family. Let's get a job that's at least near enough that we can drive for Thanksgiving and that sort of thing. And so we went out to Georgia and had a great experience out there. Enjoyed it a lot. Did get to be with our family. My wife's grandparents lived in Atlanta. Her dad had grown up there, and her aunts and uncles lived there, and that sort of thing. So it was a great period of our lives. But then a few years into that, after I had done my sort of tenure process and all that, Oklahoma Christian. In fact, Bailey McBride, same guy, called me and said, "Hey, would you be willing to field some phone calls from us about coming back to your alma mater?" And so then in 1999, we moved back here to Oklahoma. And so I've really lived in Oklahoma all my life, except for those years in Georgia. So.
All right. Yeah. And so, when was your first interaction with Oklahoma Humanities?
Oh, I like it. I'm glad you asked that question because I've been thinking about it. I think it would have been maybe 1991 or 2 or 3. We would have to look to see what year Dr. Martin Marty from the University of Chicago came to speak at the University of Tulsa. And one of my mentors at that time was a guy named Tom Boyd. Dr. Tom Boyd at OU was the Kingfisher College professor of world religions or something to that effect. And I had gotten to know him during undergraduate because I took a special course through the state regents. It was conducted on OU's campus, but I got to know Tom Boyd because he had hosted this course. And so when I showed back up at OU as a graduate student, Tom said he would be willing to be my reader for my dissertation. And one day he said, we were talking, having coffee, and he said, "Hey, Martin Marty is coming to Tulsa next month or whatever it was, and let me know about it." And so he said, "I think you'd really enjoy it." I had read some of Marty's work, and so my wife and I drove up to Tulsa, University of Tulsa, and lo and behold, the program was being co-sponsored by the University of Tulsa and the Oklahoma Humanities Council at that time, as it was named. And so we attended that. I believe Dr. Anita May was still the executive director of the Oklahoma Humanities at that time. And so we loved that lecture. We actually made a small donation to the Oklahoma Humanities Council at that time. And it was great. But of course, then we moved out to Georgia, kind of lost track. When we came back, I was named chair of the English department and needed to host a speaker. And so I started looking for where am I going to get money to host a speaker, and found the Oklahoma Humanities Council again. And of course, they didn't sponsor the first couple of speakers that I used, but then the rest of that is kind of the history of how I got involved with Oklahoma Humanities. So probably, to answer your question, probably 1990s, early 1990s, and then got reconnected after 2000. So.
Okay. And yeah, so when was it that you were appointed as a member of the board of trustees for the organization?
I think that was about 10 years ago. So I think 2021 might be my 10th year of involvement with the board. But really, I have to start in 2001 or 2, Daniel, because this is a story I've told to foundations and others when either Ann Thompson or Caroline Lowry and I go out to talk about other people helping to fund the activities of Oklahoma Humanities. I talk about how Oklahoma Humanities is very unique, not only because of its relationship with the National Endowment for the Humanities, but Oklahoma Humanities is a critical resource, in my opinion, and in my experience, for my home state, and for the culture here, and for the people here, and for all of our communities to truly be healthy. We need Oklahoma Humanities as a partner for public humanities. Public humanities is often misunderstood. Sometimes Ann Thompson would express frustration we've all felt in the humanities community, because we would when people hear about Oklahoma Humanities, often the public, unless they have direct experience with Oklahoma Humanities, they'll say, "Oh, I'm very much about the protection of animals, and I'm so glad we have the Humane Society." And we're like, "No, no, no, no. We're not the Humane Society. We don't want you to mistreat your pets or animals of any kind, but we are different, right? And so we have to talk about that." But truly, Oklahoma Humanities has for decades touched all 77 counties in the state, sponsoring programs all across the state, as you well know. And so it had, the way I became such a genuine fan and aficionado, and then finally involved with Oklahoma Humanities, is really the story of being a faculty member, Daniel. I needed to, I was named chair of an English department, small program, small campus. I think I had in my budget as a chairman, I had $650 in my discretionary fund at the time to conduct various kinds of activities that the department wanted to conduct. And it was a long time ago, but $650 was still not very much money. And so I conducted a faculty planning session in my department, and I said, "So I'm new here, been here 2-3 years. This is my alma mater. We want things to go well. What do we really need to do?" So I asked this question in a sort of strategic planning meeting that we were conducting. And the answer came back from the senior faculty member down. They wanted help in recruiting students, and they wanted help in hosting speakers for the humanities, and specifically visiting poets and visiting writers who could model for our students how to become a professional writer. So I started sort of digging around for who we might invite, and found out that the Texas Poet Laureate, Walt McDonald, who was for years at the University of Texas, was at Texas Tech in Lubbock. Walt McDonald, really an eminent poet. The university press there at Texas Tech still gives a Walt McDonald Prize for a first collection of poetry. He's a really great guy. He was known, he was an acquaintance of one of our faculty members, and that faculty member had invited him to come to our campus, and through a series of happenstances, that event had not happened. We hadn't been able to host him. And so I decided I'm going to bring this guy back. So Walt McDonald was working on a volume of poems at that time called Faith is a Radical Master. And it later came out from ACU Press. And so Walt brought his manuscript in progress and read to us. And I used that $650 to pay him to come up. We put him up in a board member's house, a board member at the university who had a beautiful home with a guest suite. And so, and then, you know, I used my boss's credit card to buy a couple of meals for him while I was here. It was just, you know, it was learning. It was just try to figure out how to put on an event. We had a small crowd, but a nice crowd. It was a really wonderful event. Walt McDonald read a poem. You might enjoy it sometime, Daniel. It's called Baptizing the Dog at 9. And it's hilarious and touching. And it's this 9-year-old boy who loves his dog, you know, and anyway, he dunks his dog in the cow tank, I think is what happens. But anyway, you know, he was just a great guest to have on campus. It went so well, in fact, that the president and other leaders at the university said, "Hey, Scott, let's back up a little bit and get some funds and do this well next year. Let's do it, you know, plan it and really take a running start at it." And that's when I wrote my first grant to the Oklahoma grant request to the Oklahoma Humanities Council at that time. And I think maybe I ended up not being able to get the draft ready in time. So David Pettijohn and Ann Thompson said, "Hey, why don't you write a challenge? Why don't you just ask for an opportunity grant?" That's what it was, opportunity grant. So I got $1,000. So the next year I had $1,000 from Oklahoma Humanities and $650. I mean, Daniel, I was in tall cotton and I had $1,600 whole dollars. But over time, that developed and we continued it each year, went really well. And through the help of David Pettijohn, who at that time was running the grant program for the council, I learned how to write the grants, and we got larger grants in some of those subsequent years. We hosted writers like Kathleen Norris, the author of Dakota, Marilyn Robinson, who's written the Gilead series, which is one of the great novel series of American 20th and 21st century literature. Bill McKibben, the environmentalist, he was in the New York Times this last week writing about the Biden administration and goals for our climate, which is an urgent need. Nicholas Sparks, who's written many best-selling novels, which have become movies. So Nicholas Sparks, we've hosted playwright David Henry Wong, poet Dana Gioia, who for a while was, in fact, we had him on campus, I believe, the year after he ended his tenure as chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts. The Boston poet Robert Pinsky, who delivered 9/11 poems in the celebrations of and memorials related to the 9/11 victims and heroes during that process. So just a lot of national figures, and Oklahoma Humanities has been right beside us all the way in a variety of ways, co-sponsoring. You know, some years it would be sponsoring the scholar who would come out to have this conversation. Sometimes it would be other elements of the program. So eventually, through all of that, Daniel, we not only got into this cadence of an annual public humanities event offered free to and advertised across the community, but also we developed a reputation for helping to host what we call urgent or important dialogues, but they're dialogues about things that are complicated. I mean, I took Bill McKibben to a luncheon of the Oklahoma Petroleum Club. I mean, can you imagine bringing an environmentalist who wants to keep all the oil in the ground and bringing him to a luncheon of oil producers in one of the oil producing states like Oklahoma and saying, hey guys, let's talk, right? And honestly, it sounds a little, maybe even a little crazy or a little kooky to say, how do we get those two groups to talk to one another? But honestly, not only my worldview, but the worldview of our university, and I believe at the heart of what humanities disciplines are, is this idea that, hey guys, we can talk about this. How do we talk about this? What do we need to do in order to talk about this? And so, you know, the McBride Center, which grew up around these efforts on our campus, we hosted Miroslav Volf, who is a very important scholar of Islam and Islamic studies. We brought Miroslav Volf to campus during this huge controversy between Volf and Wheaton University and other evangelical universities who were saying, you cannot say that Allah is the same God that Christians worship. And Wheaton University had just fired a faculty member over wearing a headscarf in solidarity with her Islamic students at Wheaton. We hosted Volf for this broad conversation. We had to conduct the meal off campus because two wonderful members of our local Islamic community helped to co-sponsor the event. And here are these two brothers who are leaders in our community who partner with a Christian university to have this conversation. And then when Volf shows up and gives his speech, this couple come up to me afterwards. We had 1,000 people there, Daniel, and they were at this free lecture. This older couple walk up to me and say, we wanted to meet you. and this was when Wolf was signing books out in the lobby, and they said, we wanted to meet you, and they introduced themselves. It was the parents of the faculty member in Chicago who had been fired, and they told me their story a little bit, and they said, we wanted to tell Professor Wolf thank you. And so I walked this couple up and held up the line, in the book signing line, and said, Professor Wolf, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but I think you have to meet this couple. And they stood there and talked, and this couple with tears in their eyes said, you are the only person who supported our daughter when she was fired at Wheaton. And we appreciated it so much. And so, it's been a lot of fun. And it's been fun to see how even these very emotional and difficult topics are things that really bring about very rich interpersonal and relational kinds of experiences. So my involvement with the Oklahoma Humanities began because I was trying to lead this lecture series on our campus for the community. And so by partnering with Oklahoma Humanities, we were able to get it done. I probably need to back up just a little bit and tell you about the McBride Center. In the middle of that process, for 15 years, we started an endowed center for the humanities, for public humanities. And so if that's okay, I can tell you about that.
Yeah. So yeah, please do tell me about that.
Yeah, so as we were in that series, and Oklahoma Humanities was helping us each year in various ways through the grant process that was established, we determined that we had the opportunity to pursue the endowment of a center named for my old mentor, Dr. Bailey McBride, and his wife, Joyce. And so the university chose to name the center the McBride Center for Public Humanities and the McBride Lecture for Faith and Literature. We began pursuing our alumni and others to provide funds to endow that so that the interest, the proceeds each year could come off of that endowment to help fund the annual lecture. And we had enough success that we decided we'd like to write an NEH challenge grant. And so at that time, the NEH had a grant that allowed for just this type of project if it addressed certain criteria related to public humanities. And so a colleague and I, Will Blanchard, at that time, Will Blanchard and I wrote a grant. I think this might have been 2005 or 6. And we wrote the grant. We did not receive funding. We rewrote the grant. We did not receive funding. But the third time was the charm, as the cliche goes, Daniel. We, on the third time, we were selected for funding by the National Endowment for Humanities. We received the challenge approval. And so the way the challenge grant worked, we had to raise $3 from other sources to get $1 of NEH money. And so that 3-to-1 match, as it's called, was for a total of about $300,000 from the NEH. And we were able to successfully complete it. I didn't know at that time, but I later learned, I served as many years later, I was able to serve as a reviewer for the National Endowment for Humanities because we had completed our challenge. We had no more business in front of the NEH, so I wasn't a conflict of interest, but I knew how challenge grants worked. And so they brought me out to Washington, DC to serve as a panelist and read other universities and museums and cultural institutions as they sought challenge grants. I did not know at that time, but I learned through the process of serving as a panelist that it was very rare for a university to receive the challenge grant and also to meet it, because raising those $3 to get $1, that process is pretty tough. And so a lot of people, a lot of organizations don't have the loyalty of donors required to be able to pull that off. And I was just very, very fortunate to have a small circle of donors who were willing to give large amounts of money. One donor who gave well over $500,000 to help bring the McBride Center to full endowment level. And so that was just a really great thing. And so often I tell people when they want to give to, or when I'm asking someone if they would give to the McBride Center, I often say the McBride Center would not exist today without the NEH, and the NEH Challenge Grant would never have been a possibility if it hadn't been for the grants that the Oklahoma Humanities Foundation, or the Oklahoma Humanities Council at that time, the Oklahoma Humanities Council gave to us. So we got operational dollars from the Oklahoma Humanities, and we were able to raise endowment dollars from our private donors. And then we got challenge dollars to match those from the NEH. And so all of those things together built a permanent source of public humanities programming for the state of Oklahoma. The pinnacle of that before COVID, now we have the before times and the after times. So my last public program before COVID, Daniel, was a man named Brian Stevenson. And Brian Stevenson wrote a book called Just Mercy. And you may have seen or heard about him, Daniel, because number one, there was a movie starring a wonderful actor whose name I can't, Michael B. Jordan, I think, in Just Mercy, the movie. And I may have that wrong, but I believe it was. Anyway, we had Brian Stevenson out in the spring of 2018 for our History Speaks series. And it was a public event. We did a full day workshop with Oklahoma legislators. We were co-sponsored by the Arnold Foundation, the Kaiser Family Foundation out of Tulsa, the Inasmuch Foundation out of here in Oklahoma City, and the McBride Center at Oklahoma Christian University. And so those four co-sponsors built an afternoon program for legislators and nonprofit leaders to talk about in what ways is our criminal justice system really having negative impacts on our culture, on our people, on the incarcerated, on the families of the incarcerated. And we have this massive nationwide crisis of incarceration. And we are having very negative impacts on the African-American community, Black and brown peoples, on the poor, on Native American populations, on women who are incarcerated and who have children during their incarceration. So, all these social problems related, that was the subject of the afternoon workshop. Then that evening, Brian Stevenson spoke to a packed house, 1,100, 1,200, something like that, however many seats are in that auditorium. He spoke for about 40 minutes, got a couple of standing ovations. I mean, he was just silent. And about 40 minutes in, he looks over at me and he says, "Dr. LaMascus, I just feel like I could keep going. But I know I've reached the time when you told me I have to stop." And the crowd just interrupted. I didn't get really a chance to answer. The crowd interrupted and just started cheering, just massively cheering. And so I just kind of held up my hand and went like this. And everybody in the room saw me and he saw me. And so the room instantly, it just died. And he started talking again. We listened to that man for another 40 minutes. Can you imagine 1,100 people sitting in their chairs for 80 minutes listening to one man speak? And it was astonishing, Daniel. It was a very unusual moment in my life. And everyone who was there, while I was walking out of the event several hours later with the president of our university, and he said, "I think that might have just been the most important single speech ever given on our campus." And, if you know college presidents, they'll say, typically, they would be probably most likely to say that about their own speech, but not about someone else's. My president of my university, is a great guy, and he's humble and all that. But But, you know, we both had this feeling that something very special had just happened. You know, those kind of moments don't come about, and institutions don't take risks to host these very difficult, urgent, um, emotional, conflict-laden conversations. You don't have those if your funding is in question, or if your funding is always being threatened. Oh, if we offend this person, we won't be funded. If we offend this person, we won't be funded. We have to use those kinds of funds responsibly, but man, I'm not going to be shy about it, Daniel. It was one of the high points of my career. In fact, maybe the high point of my career, other than getting the NEH Challenge Grant, was just seeing and hearing this man, Brian Stevenson, say incredibly difficult, sometimes painful things, things that the white community needs to hear, things the Black community needed to hear, and so on, and really calling us all to be better and to do better. Well, that was in 2018. We had about 1,500 participants. I'm super grateful to the Arnold Family Foundation, George Kaiser Family Foundation, Inasmuch Foundation, and of course, I'm grateful to everybody at Oklahoma Humanities who helped us achieve the McBride Center for Public Humanities, because that's the kind of thing that we get to do. And our guests that night were literally from all over the state. When we had Nicholas Sparks on campus, we had, I think we had 7 states. We had people from 7 states drive to Oklahoma City to hear Nicholas Sparks. So, you know, it's fun to get to serve our state and do something that we feel like is of significance. So I better stop there. I could go on forever about this stuff. I just love it.
Yeah. So could you explain to me how you became a member of the Board of Trustees for Oklahoma Humanities?
Sure. Well, about 10 years ago, of course, I had been to board events as a funded partner of the Oklahoma Humanities. So I had been invited to events, and I had gotten to know people who were on the board at that time, such as Beverly Davis and Ken Ferguson and Susan McCarthy, and some faculty members, an old classmate of mine, Andrew Vassar from Tahlequah, and I can't think of everybody right this second, but lots and lots of just really nice people. And so I gotten to know them. And, you know, I was there to tell them, thank you for giving us $1,000 for our speaker series. Thank you for giving us $8,000 to provide the operating funds while we're raising money to get an endowment. And so as we got toward the point where the McBride Center would be not asking for funds every year, but would be actually bringing funds to the table through its endowment, I was asked to serve on the board to fill out the term of someone who had needed to step off. It was a gubernatorial appointment, and I was named to the board at that point. So this was about 10 years ago, and then was selected for additional terms and renewal. Really have enjoyed it a lot. And then 2 years ago, I think, if I'm getting the timing right, was serving as chair for the year when Ann Thompson announced that she would be retiring. And then we searched for a new executive director, and I was was selected to chair that. We decided to operate the search internally. So the committee and I, search committee and I, of board members and community members, worked really hard on a national search for a new executive director. Had some fantastic applicants, truly from all across the nation and all across the state. And honestly, it was a scary competitive field. Just people with so many wonderful experiences directing museums and major cultural institutions and our state's top institutions, and people who have been serving in other states' humanities councils and that sort of thing. And so ultimately, through that process, of course, we now know that Caroline Lowry was selected, offered that position, and brought in. And of course, now we're just super proud to see all the things Caroline's doing. Staff is doing such a great work, and so on. So I became involved in the board about 10 years ago. Ann Thompson invited me to fill a remaining term of a member who was stepping off.
Okay. And what exactly are the responsibilities of a member of the Board of Trustees?
Sure. Well, we have lots of policies and statements about that. In short, we not only serve to represent the Oklahoma Humanities in our communities. So, I love talking about Oklahoma Humanities, and so it's a natural thing for me to be in a group and to talk about Oklahoma Humanities, whether I'm talking about the McBride Center and I'm giving Oklahoma Humanities credit for helping us get to this point. We always have enjoyed giving Oklahoma Humanities credit in the appropriate ways when we do have, 1,200 people on campus. It's easy for me to say genuinely and with great appreciation, we are grateful for the support of the Oklahoma Humanities. But so that advocacy or representing in public and in our communities is important. So we have board members who are citizens in our tribes here in Oklahoma, and so they represent the Oklahoma Humanities to those tribes. They advocate for us and talk about us and help us know how to serve those communities and so on. So we have a diverse group of people in a diverse group of communities across Oklahoma, all across the state, who represent what we're doing to make Oklahoma's culture better and stronger through the humanities. A second kind of function, of course, is to help the Oklahoma Humanities be compliant with all the kinds of procedures and policies and even regulations for how we spend federal dollars in the state. So, when the NEH gives us $1 and we take grant applications and give that $1, then in turn we re-grant that $1 to the to a museum for an exhibit, or to the Greenwood Cultural District leaders for a program about the race massacre, or we bring a Smithsonian exhibit to Ada and we put that out in the public and we bring scholars to talk about it. It's the board members who help run that re-granting system that makes all that possible. And there are a lot of details in there, but that's in general. So representing the Oklahoma Humanities in our community, helping operate the grant system and the policies and operations, and give that oversight as required by the bylaws and federal regulations as well. And then thirdly, your board members of almost any nonprofit are also an important source of fundraising. It could be that we play a role in actually leading to a donor. So maybe I donate $1 myself. Maybe I go introduce a friend of mine to Caroline Lowry and say, friend, you need to consider funding the Oklahoma Humanities. So that, I call that friend raising. Sometimes it's where you are willing to, you feel strongly enough about an organization that you're willing to introduce your friends to that organization, and vice versa for donations. And then third, is actually participating in other kinds of fundraising of the Oklahoma Humanities. So, for example, Ann Thompson asked me to go out to Chesapeake Oil and talk to their foundation leaders. This was probably 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. The Oklahoma Humanities was seeking a grant of operating dollars from the Chesapeake Foundation. So I went out, put on my suit and tie, we go to the board meeting, and I gave my pitch for why I felt that the Oklahoma Humanities was not just a good place, but an important place for Chesapeake Foundation to provide funding to our community. So those are probably three duties that I think of related to the board at Oklahoma Humanities. I almost said Oklahoma Christian University there. Sorry, at Oklahoma Humanities. But honestly, the pure and simple answer to your question, what does the board do? We obey our bylaws, we operate according to policy, and we hire executive directors. You know, those are that's another way of slicing that question that you asked, Amy. So yeah, thanks for asking that. And the board at Oklahoma Humanities is an astonishing and wonderful group of people. They are faculty members at universities all across the state. They are, we have bankers and engineers and people who run some of our very best companies in the state. And we have leaders and cultural leaders in tribes. And we have, I mean, you know, it'd just be almost impossible for me to list all the different ways in which our board members are already involved in the community, already leading, already doing important work, but they also volunteer to be part of the board of a nonprofit that, as you can see, I feel pretty strongly about.
Yeah. So we're getting pretty close to an hour mark here. So as a sort of wrap up, I'll just open the floor to you to talk about any final thoughts or feelings that you have about the Oklahoma Humanities organization or just the humanities in general in Oklahoma.
Sure. Well, yeah, I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to give you this interview, to record this, and hopefully to archive this for a long time. I do think many of the things we do in the humanities community can sort of evaporate into the air. You know, you have this event with Brian Stevenson, and he comes to the state and he meets with legislators and influences legislation that is coming through our cities and state governments to change the way we manage our criminal justice system. And no one ever, you know, those links are subtle enough and are happening in real time. And it's easy to think Oklahoma Humanities didn't influence the criminal justice reform that happened in 2018, 19, and 20 in the state of Oklahoma. Of course, right now we're involved in a pandemic, so we can think of almost nothing else. But the reality is that our the culture of Oklahoma, the people of Oklahoma, and our institutions are tightly bound together. And so whether it's hosting Let's Talk About It Oklahoma, book clubs all across the state, which we've done for a really long time, sending our magazine, Oklahoma Humanities, to every county in the state. So all across the state, people have access to these free copies of magazine with humanities, high quality humanities scholars and high quality humanities content, whether it's our podcasts that we're putting out or it's public events. Museums on Main Street. Museums on Main Street brings Smithsonian institution exhibits to communities across the state. And those are hosted in small towns and in cities all across the state. All of those kinds of activities, Daniel, I believe, are easy to overlook. They're easy. It's easy in retrospect to say, what are the 5 things that happened in Oklahoma that made the big difference? Well, you know, these are all a lot of small things happening in small towns where there is not ready access. If you live in Woodward, it is hard to get to a major museum like the Smithsonian unless you're a family of means and can travel. Well, bringing Smithsonian level content on relevant topics to the Woodward Public Library or Atoka Public Library or Miami Public Library. Those kinds of events are deeply impactful for those small communities. And when you go out, as I've done, to some of those communities and attend the grand opening of one of those Smithsonian exhibits, you see that we are getting to touch people's lives right where they are. And I think that Oklahoma and Oklahoma's people are better because we know how to get together and we know how to talk about the humanities disciplines. We know how to bring scholars to that conversation who are willing and able to articulate ideas and to bring people into conversation about ideas. And I find it really exciting. It's been a great blessing in my life to get to be involved with Oklahoma Humanities. The people who are involved, honestly, if you ask me to name my 40 best friends, 25 of them are Oklahoma Humanities board members, and my wife and my kids. And, you know, it's a pretty small group because my life is about the humanities, and it matters. The things that people love include the things we talk about when we talk about the humanities. And if you're not interested in the things that people love and the things that people are dedicated to, then it's going to be really hard to make the kind of deep and lasting and meaningful relationships that I think make life worth living. And so it's been a great privilege. I'm needing to term off of the Oklahoma Humanities Board after this year. And I'm really not looking forward to that because I love working with the board. On the other hand, I've told them and I've told Caroline Lowry, and I go on the record here to say I will be a fan. I have been a fan, and I'll continue to attend the events and enjoy the benefits of what the Oklahoma Humanities does as it pursues its mission. So I'll be around. I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for doing this with me.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it's been a great experience.
Well, thank you. Likewise. Man, I didn't talk about oral histories, but when I was an undergraduate, there was a guy on the campus of Oklahoma Christian named Pendleton Woods. And Pendleton Woods had been a POW in the Korean War, I believe. And he did something called, he did an oral history project funded by the Oklahoma History Center. And they were, like pioneers. It was like interviewing people who had come to Oklahoma before statehood and that kind of thing. And so he was, doing, what was the Dust Bowl like? What was Oklahoma like during the Spanish-American War? He was these kinds of topics. And so, of course, back in those days, I got a campus job carrying a reel-to-reel recorder for this guy because he was a little bit older. He's probably about my age now, I guess. But anyway, so I would carry, he would say, we're going to such and such address, and I would meet at some socialite's house, and I would get out of my little trunk of my Mustang, I would get a reel-to-reel projector and a folding screen, one of those terrible folding projection screens, and go to this lady's house, and she would say, oh, please don't scratch the Chippendale, or whatever. And I would set all this stuff up, and then I would sip coffee and cookies in the background while this guy gave his talk about this oral history collection. And so I think what you're doing is a really great thing. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks again.
Are you a student at Oklahoma State?
No, I go to OU.
Oh, at OU. Excuse me.
No, I'm the only OU student that's doing these interviews for Oklahoma Humanities. So most of the involvement's with OSU. But
excellent. I almost said Gettinger Hall, but I realized you don't know Gettinger Hall because the English building has been demolished, and now there's this beautiful, thing standing where it was. It was a pretty crummy building, but anyway, it was on the North Oval, and I loved living in Norman and loved my OU years. They were fantastic years. But So what's your major?
I'm double majoring in history and chemistry.
History and chemistry. Fantastic. What do you think you want to do?
Uh, Not too sure, sort of uh, working on that. The history is a recent addition. So, you know,
Well, I want to encourage you to keep it up. As I told you, one of my sons is an engineer. His undergraduate major was mechanical engineering, and but he has probably 40 hours in the humanities.
mhm.
And the Ivy, he's, as I told you, he's at University of Pennsylvania. He has a fully funded PhD program there. He has just won a couple of big grants from the Department of Defense. And, you know, people talk a lot about how STEM and the humanities can't be friends, you know, but the reality is at the elite level, Daniel, what the elite level wants is not more people who can run the widgets, because they've got lots of gearheads who can do that. And that's my son's word for it. But he did a postgraduate year at Harvard in physics. And he said, Dad, anybody can do what the grad students are doing in physics at Harvard if you understand and like physics, if you've dedicated yourself to physics. He said what they really need and what they wanted me for was that I had not just my technical skills, but I also had a real understanding of the humanities. And so, you know, just kudos for you, and stick to your guns. Don't let anybody talk you out of it. And, you know, the world is big, and it's a lot bigger than either or thinking, you know?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So keep it up. Okay. Well, it's great to meet you, Daniel. Email me if there's anything I can do. I sent you those 2 pictures. And if one of those won't work, let me know and I'll do whatever you need.
Yeah, I'll be sure to reach out if we ever need you again.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
Good.
thank you. Have a
Bye-bye.
nice day.
You too.